Hello guys, my name's Fenchurch and welcome to my early access preview of Lords of Xulima. Lords of Xulima is an RPG with an old school vein and was successfully funded via Kickstarter back in November 2013. In fact, it was funded more than 3 times its original target, so there was some real buzz around this game when the Kickstarter campaign was completed. It's developed by a company called Numantian Games, and they're based in Madrid, and as far as I'm aware this is their first ever game. And before we dig into the game itself, I'd like to start off by saying that it's been an awfully long time since I've played an old school style RPG like this, but what dragged me in really was they listed on their website as their influences games like Ultima, Baldur's Gate and even Final Fantasy, and back when I was a kid I used to love old school RPGs like that, and as much as I'd love this game to be those games, that's the last I'm going to mention of them because Lords of Xulima should be judged as its own, and so that's what I'll do. I've clocked around 10 hours with Lords of Xulima now, and I have to say it's kind of addictive. Initially I wasn't overly keen, but now that I've had a chance to explore the map a bit and kind of develop my characters the way I want them to be combat wise, I do find the combat and the exploration much more enjoyable. So let's start the game up and I will show you the character building options.
Was I sleeping that I felt as if I...
And then we'll load up one of my previous saves and I'll show you the game world itself and some of the combat. So upon starting the game, I skipped the cutscene there for anyone who's wanting to avoid any kind of spoilers. But on starting the game, you either get Quick Start, which basically generates all your characters without you having to do anything. And I wouldn't really recommend that unless you've played this game through once before and you maybe just want that added bit of challenge. Creating your custom party is always the way to go for me, to be honest. The story behind Lords of Xulima is basically this guy called Galen has been given a kind of divine mission from the gods to go and save the continent of Xulima, basically. So he will always be in your party. He's always kind of the main character, the one that interacts with all the NPCs and everything like that. So his class is Explorer, which is basically just kind of a combat class, and his specific character abilities, although you can level them up on the other characters eventually, but his specific character abilities are things like herbalism, and there's one ability when you're kind of running around on the map you can get random encounters. Most of them are kind of obvious encounters, but you do get random ones and you get the option to cloak your party, kind of hide them from the combat, and he has that ability. So let's create a new character and I'll show you a bit more of the character building side. Obvious man and woman choice, and this is the character tiles you get that show up on the left hand side of your party. So quite a lot to choose from. They make no difference to your character whatsoever depending on which one you choose. I'm just going to go for the first one just for the sake of things. And these are the character classes. So if you've played any kind of RPGs like this before, there's a few of the classes that you'll recognize. Thief is the kind of rogue class, high damage, does a lot of kind of poison and bleed damage, lockpicking, that kind of thing. Throwing weapons, always carries like daggers. You get Paladin, which is more your kind of combat class again, swords, a bit more tanky, and they kind of do blessings on the party, kind of buff them up a bit. Soldier is your kind of tank class. Again, kind of high damage, but mostly health, kind of just blocking attacks from the rest of the group. You also get Cleric, which is your healer, and then you get some new classes. Bard is a ranged class. They use bows, and they also buff up the... you get options to buff up the team with that as well. Barbarian I've not actually used yet, but I think they're mostly a combat class. In the combat goes, basically you get two rows, a front row and a back row. The front row takes most of the damage and deals probably most of the damage. The back row, you can kind of afford to keep their health a bit lower and make their damage a bit higher. They take less damage because you have to stretch past the front row to be able to hit the back row. So you want things like Cleric and Mage on the back row because they don't tend to have high armor. Paladin and Soldier on the front row. Arcane Soldier is that kind of mix of spells and combat. And Divine Summoner I've not used yet either, but I believe they can summon creatures. Not quite sure on that one. I kind of went for the standard, in my first playthrough I went for the standard Thief, Paladin, Soldier, Cleric, Mage, and I chose a Bard as well, though I don't really like the Bard class to be honest. Let's just go for Mage just now. So, the next section is the 9 gods of the continent, and each one of them gives you a slight increase on a certain stat. So if you know what kind of combat style you want to play for, we chose Mage, so power points, energy points is it called? You can choose basically, so you can have things like hit points, increase combat speed, that one does experience. There's one that does energy points somewhere. Power points, there we go. Is that right? Yeah, power points. So power points increase your magical abilities, and then you get to choose a weapon specialization as well. So for a mage I would suggest more kind of pole weapons, because you're going to be at the back dealing damage from the back with your spells and things. It's not really worth going for a dagger. So basically you create all your characters. Like I say, there's a back row and a front row, so you want to kind of judge your character creation on that basis. There's 8 spaces but only 6 characters, so you could have 4 in the front to kind of take more of the damage and be more kind of soldier class. Or you could have, what I did was I had 3 in the front and 3 in the back, so I had a healer, the bard in the back and the mage in the back, and obviously the healer was healing mostly, not dealing any damage. The mage was dealing a lot of damage, and I kind of built his class around dealing damage and not so much about taking damage. And then there was the bard as well, which is able to buff quite a lot, especially the characters in the front row who are taking and dealing a lot of the damage. So we'll just quit out this just now, and I'll load up one of my previous saves and I'll show you more of the world itself and a bit of the combat. So here we are in the game itself. We've got the party here on the left hand side, we've got the map on the bottom right, and our character here in the middle. No matter how many people are in your party, it all shows up as one character when you're kind of travelling around the map. Each character has a subsection where you can change their armour. You can view all their stats like leveling stats, strength and damage, and evasion, and you can also view what items and abilities you have in your backpack. it also shows when you level up you get to level certain abilities, and it shows your progress on all of those. The map here, it's the whole world map there. You start off kind of down in this bottom area here, and I'm away off in a different section just now, but you get the kind of the fog of war effect. As you travel, it kind of reveals certain points on the map, and until you travel to that point you don't know what's there. So as you can see, the world map is actually quite big, and that section of map that I just showed you, the regional map here, that is probably, I mean, I've not explored the whole world map just yet, but that's probably about a 20th of the size of the whole map. So you also get before I was mentioning the combat kind of positioning. So that's your 8 spaces, and I've got 3 in the front and 3 in the back. You can move them about. You can have 4 in the front, 2 in the back, and you can have them on specific sides. I've got my rogue in the front, my adventurer, and my paladin? Is that soldier? Soldier, yeah. And then I've got my bard, mage, and the cleric in the back. Positioning, I'll show you more of that when we actually get into combat. You also get your collected herbs. You collect herbs when you're moving around the map, and they do specific things like give you bonus skill points or food as well. And as you can see, food reserves for that one. Your food meter is at the bottom here. That 5 counts for 5 days. It doesn't go down unless you move a square. The time, as you can see there, is stuck at 4:02, but as soon as I move, the time continues. So if you stay still in one spot, you're not going to waste your food reserves, you're not going to progress through the day anymore unless you actually travel. You've also got the journal here, which basically explains parts of the story that you've advanced through, missions that you've got active and cleared, and you can make notes on the map as well. I forgot to mention that. So you just go to new note, stick it on a point of interest that you found, and write down like hidden enemy or something like that, and then that point stays on the map until you mouse over it and it's got your note there. So we've also got the logs here. I've just started up the game, so there's no logs here, but that would say things like increased food reserves, used a potion, entered combat, things like that. You've also got the options menu here, and I'll go quickly into that. Basic sound volumes, language settings, and graphic settings. And I'm not massive on my graphic settings, but you can choose between DirectX and OpenGL. And basically, I think OpenGL uses your graphics card to kind of boost the graphics a bit, but as far as I've noticed, it doesn't make any difference. Also, as this is early access, the sound volumes or sound options are not really working as well as they could be, to be honest, but I expect that to be fully sorted come the full release. It's a pretty basic options menu, but there's not much intensity graphic wise to the game, so I didn't expect anything amazing. So let's get into a bit of combat, and I'll explain that a bit further. This is the first kind of real dungeon that I came to. I have cleared it now, but that was a really good area to be on there. Nabros Castle, for anyone who's playing the game and gets to this stage, that's a really fun part of the game. So I did mention before that you get random encounters occasionally, not in every area. Most areas you get enemies like this, and the first thing you'll notice as you mouse over them is there's a big combat circle. So once you enter that circle, that's when combat begins, and if you right click on the enemy, it shows you the difficulty of the group and shows you how many enemies there are. So there's 5 enemies. and it shows you their combat layout as well. So there'll be 2 in the front row, 3 in the back. 3 in the front row, 2 in the back row, and the difficulty is balanced, so that should be quite easy. At first, I thought this combat mechanic was a little strange, but it works really well. As you can see here, that circle blocks off that area, so if your group is not strong enough to take on that enemy, it basically blocks that area off until you've leveled up a bit or you've gained some better armor. So I think that's actually quite clever. So let's get into the combat. First thing you'll notice is on the right hand side here there is a combat order. So that is the order that the enemies get their chance to combat, to attack, should I say. On the top here you get all your different abilities depending on which class you are, and you get the kind of health, and the blue bit is the power points, so that's using your special abilities. You can set the combat speed to fast, but as it's kind of turn based it doesn't really make a difference, it just makes your turn go faster. If you right click on the enemies, it shows health and active effects. So the thing that's kind of more unique to Lords of Xulima compared to other RPG games like this that I've played is that there is a lot of focus on buffs and debuffs and active effects. So for example, my soldier here has a big mace as her weapon. When she hits someone it stuns them and it knocks them back in the combat order here by a certain amount of seconds depending on how you've leveled that ability. And it's not seconds in real time, it's just seconds as in the order of the combat. So 1 second might knock you back 1 place, but that's not 1 second in real time. The arrow above this guy's head shows you on the combat status here as well. So if you're wanting to knock back the guy who's going to have the next go, that's actually one of these guys at the back here. We can't actually reach them unless we use an ability. Flames is the one that goes back, there we go. So now you see the arrow above that character there. And let's explain a bit about what's going on here. So you can use your basic weapon attack there. You can basically set your stance as defensive, which blocks any incoming attacks. You can move your character. You can see the layout here, there's like a left and a right to the way that these guys are laid out. If you're on the very right hand side of the group you can't hit enemies that are on the very left hand side of the group. So if I was to clear these guys, my rogue here wouldn't be able to hit this guy on the very left if he was last, so I could move him over there as an option, for example, later on. You can also use items that you've collected, throw-in weapons, consumables like healing potions, and you collect these kind of items from enemies and they debuff, see that one there, cures poison. So they debuff effects that the enemy places on you. You also get magic items like scrolls that do certain effects, and you can use those effects regardless of if you're a mage or not. Also more healing items and things like that. This one changes your equipment, but that uses up a turn, so it's best to kind of get your equipment and your weapons sorted out before you go into combat. And as a mage I've got lots of abilities here. Sparks does damage to one enemy, fire damage to one enemy, flames does fire damage to anybody in a row, and then I've got my kind of ice, electrical damage and stone damage, earth damage. So let's progress the combat a little bit here. And as you can see now on their active effects, they have burning as an active effect. So that basically means that every full turn, as in every one of their group has taken a turn, this enemy will burn for 4 points of damage. That works as well with poison and bleeding effects. It's per, the number at the bottom there is per full turn how many points of damage that enemy will take. You can also see as you mouse over a hit percentage, and you can increase that with your agility. As we've not taken any damage yet, my cleric here is kind of useless, so we'll just do a basic attack. And as you see, that stunned that enemy, and I don't think they were very high up in the combat order there, but they got stunned and knocked back a little bit. So this is the Bard, and with the Bard you can do different buffs and debuffs. So Song of Disruption, Song of Stunning, basically has a chance to stun all the enemies, and as you can see everyone got stunned apart from one there, so that's knocked them all way back in the combat order there, and we've got lots of turns to kind of play with and deal a lot of damage here. So we're back to the mage. Let's deal a bit more focused damage on one character. We killed that one off and brought this one forward, which means the other non-ranged characters at the front here have a chance to hit this guy. So let's see. Usually the characters at the back are the ones that are a bit more dangerous. They deal magic and poison damage usually, and the front ones are just kind of to take a bit of damage while these guys at the back deal the damage. So this is us onto our soldier now, the main kind of tanky class that I've got in my group anyway. Their abilities are the Powerful Strike, which basically deals enhanced physical damage on one character, or Stunning Strike. It also stuns as well, Powerful Strike. As a weapon choice I chose mace for the soldier, and the mace has a stun on it as a normal attack anyway, so Powerful Strike. Well, that just outright killed that character, so you didn't get to see the stun. Still nobody's been damaged, so my cleric is still kind of useless here, but I'll show you one of the abilities anyway. Divine Armor. Basically it places bonus armor on them, so they take less damage when they get hit. I usually put it on the rogue, because he has less health than the other three characters in the front there, so reduced damage is always good for him. So as you can see now, the rogue is on the very right hand side, but can't reach the characters on the left. So I was talking earlier about moving the characters. Move character over to the left there. The only thing is that you can't, if you have a character in the back, they have to have a character in the front. So when I moved the rogue over to the left there, anyone that was behind them had to move forward. So you have to think about that when you're moving your characters as well. If you've got a character with hardly any health, like my mage, and you move the character in front of them, that puts them very at risk of taking a lot of damage. So let's just quickly finish off these two guys. And at the end of combat, you get this little victory screen. You get experience, you get gold, and you sometimes get items, usually on the harder characters. And that's the basic combat. So as you explore, you can see that the fog is kind of moving away there. This is a portal, which basically means that any other portals you find within the world, you can use them to fast travel. That saves on your food reserves, and it's quite handy to kind of memorize where they are. That's the two that I found. I'll not use those just now. Here are the herbs that you can find throughout the game. They're very handy, so I would recommend picking them up. And there is a day and night cycle. during the night, should I say, in certain areas, you're more likely to encounter random enemy combat. So you do have torches with you, and you can light those torches, and that lights up the area around you, making the random encounters a bit less of a chance of them happening, basically. You can also set camp, so if your group is taking damage, you set camp, and you can do it until all characters are healed. That is health and power points. But as the time passes, that uses up your health reserves. I'll show you that just now. So you can see the food reserves, sorry. So you can see the food reserves went down there, but all my characters have now got full power points, and they would have full health if I'd taken any damage. And you can now see that if I turn on my torch, as it's getting towards dark just now, 8 o'clock, that it lights up the kind of area around me now. Makes it easier to see items as well. That's an added bonus. So looting. You do get kind of chests and areas like this where they're kind of just off in the corner of the map. So it is worth exploring kind of every part of the map that you possibly can. You quite often come across hidden areas like that with little chests, and they usually have quite nice armour and things for your guys to wear. So that's as you travel along, Galen's herbalism ability, which I've leveled up quite a lot. You can occasionally find herbs on the ground, find edible food and stuff, and that's just random. Adds a tiny little bit to your food reserves there. So this is a new area I've not actually, well, up here is a new area that I've not actually been to. There was a guy guarding here before, and he was a kind of employee of one of the bosses that I've just defeated. And I don't say any more about that because that kind of spoils the story, but since I defeated him, all the kind of guards in this area have gone, and it makes it the kind of travel around here a lot easier. So you can see there's a wee sign there. The signs sometimes, that one just says to an area, but they sometimes explain a little bit about what's ahead. So if there's random encounters, it'll say that. It just kind of hints about the general area ahead. So if there was anything about Lords of Xulima that I would have to say that I didn't particularly like, one of them would be that the boss encounters that I've come across so far are not really special enough, and by that I mean they just seem like they're slightly harder enemies than normal enemies. They deal a wee bit more damage, but apart from that, they don't really do anything unusual. It would be good if they had special abilities, or there was some kind of combat tactics behind each boss. As far as my group build, the way that I dealt with it was just to kind of use up my healing reserves, basically, to take that extra damage. And to me that was a bit of a challenge, but it just seems like there should be something a bit more special about these encounters, and that might be true further on in the game. But 10 hours in, I think they said there was about 60 hours of content, and I'm 10 hours in and I've not really come across any kind of one-off situations. It would be good to see things like that, especially in boss encounters. Another thing that would be good to see was as you're leveling up, although this might be something that this kind of hardcore RPG players don't like, but as you level up and you increase your skills, you might think, oh, I've put points into something that I don't want to use, or an ability that you don't want to use, and it'd be good if there was some kind of way to reskill. As you can see here, I've got a fair amount of gold. So when you go into a city, there's you can buy food, you can buy armor and weapons, and you can kind of go to, I think there was some kind of spiritual healer where you can get rid of any specific status ailments, and it would be good if there was some kind of reclass or reskill vendor where you could kind of move their skill points around, kind of just customize your classes a bit more the way that you want to. And apart from those two things, I don't really have any grumbles about Lords of Xulima. It's a very enjoyable game. It's got hours and hours and hours of content. Graphically, it's quite simple, but going with the kind of old school theme that it's trying to go for, I think the graphics fit quite well. The music is good. The characters are good, although the voice acting itself is maybe not the best. But like I say, this is early access. They still have time to kind of tweak things. They did, I think Numantian Games said that there was a kind of tentative release of November 2014, and it's November in 2014 now. And they've not released the game, so they're still tweaking things. This is probably as close to the final release as it's probably going to get before it releases, though they have been updating very regularly. But there's obviously a few more things that they want to do before the final release. This game's available on Steam, early access. Yeah, I think that's about it. So if you've enjoyed this video, if you want to see more of Lords of Xulima, just let me know, and I'd really appreciate a like on the video as well. So thanks for watching this far, guys, and I'll see you next time.